Good evening and welcome to another episode of A Real Point of View. My name is Greg Morgan. I am the Real Movie Guy, and I am joined by my cohort in crime, Miss Karen D, the movie Maven herself. How you doing, Karen?
Marvelous, simply marvelous.
As am I. Yeah, it's good to be back and hanging out. Most muscular. Okay, anyway.
No,
Yeah, so
this is just a little sort of homage to our subject of the day.
it is.
There we go.
So today's subject matter is us taking a look at a movie and see how it actually has done over time, how well it stood up to the test of time. And the movie we're going to talk about today is Gladiator. And the main star Gladiator was Russell Crowe. So there are a myriad of wonderful actors in this film. And this film came out back in 19, what was it, Karen? 19?
No,
No, not even.
2000. It's the
2000
20-year.
even. Right after Prince said it wasn't going to happen. No, I'm kidding. After he said he was going to party like it's 1999, we got to 2000. Yeah, so this came out in 2000. So we're talking 20 years, a 20-year history of a film. We always want films to be able to last because that tells us it's a testimony to how good a movie is. But just like anything else, does every movie last and do well over time? Not every movie does, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure you well know. That's another reason why so many different agencies and situations do remakes. They're trying to relive and or add to the glamour of what was once was pretty much classic Hollywood. So Russell Crowe, Joaquin Phoenix, Richard Harris. This is a great cast in this film. So why are we looking back at a film 20 years ago? Because just like anything else, years ago when they made films in the glory of Hollywood, those films just were so good, like The Maltese Falcon, Humphrey Bogart films, James Cagney films. A lot of those films still live and resonate today. But sometimes films that got made later on in time didn't do so well as far as them just being as good as they were when you watch it again. So the question today for this particular episode is, did Gladiator, that came out in the year 2000, did it stand the test of time 20 years later? So what do you think, Karen?
Okay. Well, interesting question. And like so many questions that we pose on this show, the answer is neither completely yes or completely no. I think, generally speaking, it does stand the test of time. But the reasons, in my opinion, for that don't necessarily relate to the quality of the movie specifically. Some of the reasons relate to the state of movies in general in the 21st century. So, but overall, I mean, is Gladiator a good movie? It is well done. It's a very well done movie. It won the Best Actor. I mean, because Russell Crowe took on the role of Maximus, he won Best Actor. He won the Oscar for Best Actor that year. He was nominated for a Golden Globe. Joaquin Phoenix did not win for Best Supporting Actor, but he was nominated, and he was nominated for a Golden Globe. However, what's really interesting is that when you look at the awards, Gladiator was the first movie in over 50 years which won Best Picture, but for which the Academy did not see fit to award the Best Director award or Best Writing, Best Screenplay. It wasn't even nominated in those categories. First time in 50 years that had happened. And to me, that sort of exemplifies what a sort of insider little town, industry town, Hollywood is. Because when you read the history of the making of Gladiator, when you look into that, one of the things that stands out are the script problems. Script problem after script problem after script problem. So much so that Russell Crowe was told the main screenwriter, your words are crap, and I can do better on my own. And there were ad-lib lines in the movie. I mean, you don't necessarily know unless you read the backstory. You don't know that they're ad-libbed because they do flow pretty seamlessly into the overall movie. But yeah, and Russell Crowe was ad-libbing some of his own lines and insisting on rewrites, or threatening to walk off, the set or whatever. And Ridley Scott, who's the director, was doing everything he could to, keep the actors happy. He also had his hands full with Oliver Reed. Now, Oliver Reed is an Irish, I think he's Irish, or he has a really strong connection to Ireland. But anyway, he is famous for playing Bill Sikes in the musical Oliver from the mid-60s. But he also just had a relatively long career, not so much on the American side of the pond, but on the British side of the pond. He had a very, well-known, he was very well-known and was in many projects. However, the man was an absolute terror to work with. He drank, fish were envious of his ability to drink. I'll just put it that way. The man couldn't turn down a drink if somebody had drawn him a picture. So, and he died in the middle of filming Gladiator. He played Proxima, the trainer and sort of the shepherd, or not the shepherd, but the sort of the overseer is a better word, the overseer of the gladiators. And pivotal role. But
very much
since
so.
But since he died in the middle of filming, they had to CGI the rest of his role. And so that's what they did. There was much discussion of maybe getting somebody else, or maybe just scrapping what Oliver Reed had done and just filming it all over again, filming that role all over again. But the shoot was hard. Gladiator was hard. Russell Crowe was already hanging on by a thread. In the first scene of the movie, if you look at this movie, the first scene, there's this huge battle, which is extremely well choreographed.
It is.
And also really realistic. But you get this close-up of Russell Crowe's face with all these scars, and there's some stitches and all, blood.
Stitches with stars.
Huh?
Go ahead.
No, what did you say?
I said, I don't think stitches yet, but scars. Definitely.
No, there were stitches. There were stitches because while he was filming that scene, he backed up into a horse, which beat the crap out of him. And so they literally stitched him back together while he was filming that scene. So if you look closely enough, you can see the stitches. No, of course they didn't have stitches. They weren't putting healing wounds with stitches in ancient Rome, but in 21st or 20th century Malta or wherever they were filming, they had to do something to keep the man going. So they literally slapped him back together so he could keep on, being Maximus. So no one was in favor of just oh, let's just film all these scenes again, because who knows if Russell could survive another filming. He was having enough trouble just with the first scene. So they decided to CGI Oliver Reed. The other thing was that Oliver Reed and Russell Crowe didn't get along. So that was another reason why there was some sympathy for maybe just filming Oliver Reed scenes again, because there was really just no chemistry between Oliver Reed and Russell Crowe. However, given the roles that they were playing, it makes sense that there would be no chemistry. So it probably, I think overall it was a good idea to leave Oliver Reed scenes in, and somehow they managed to CGI it. And I guess it wasn't completely insulting, because I mean, I was completely put off by the CGI tactics used in The Irishman, and I didn't even know that CGI was used in Gladiator until I found out that Oliver Reed died in the middle of filming. So, so there's that. But I mean, I guess your question is, does this movie stand the test of time? And I think it does. I mean, I know I was giving all of this backstory, but I think the backstory is fascinating. Um, do I think this movie stands the test of time? Yes, I do. Why? Not necessarily because it's the greatest movie ever made, although it is very well done. But I think on some levels, Ben-Hur was better. Like the writing was better, for one. I think Ridley Scott is really a brilliant director. And this is probably one of the best movies he's made. He made a number of like large scale movies after this, and I don't think any of them stands up to Gladiator. So yes, I think the movie does stand the test of time, but one of the reasons that it does is because with the fractured system of making movies that we have today and the absence of investor money, there aren't going to be that many directors for whom a studio or a group of investors is going to put in the amount of money that is required to pull off a movie like this. So I think I don't know when we're going to see a movie of this grand scale again, especially post-COVID. And this movie just made like it cost an insane amount of money to film. I think it was $103 million, but it made back its $103 million in the first weekend of release. That 20 years later, that's a harder feat to pull off, because we're in 2000, we didn't have the internet. I mean, we had it, but who was actually paying attention to it? We didn't have streaming. We had cable, but cable wasn't nearly as pervasive as it is today. And we didn't have, I mean, Netflix was still in its infancy, and we were still ordering DVDs from Netflix. But 2020 is a whole different can of worms from a movie industry standpoint. And so I'm thinking, if I'm an investor and I'm looking for some place to park my money, and Ridley Scott comes along and says, hey, I'd like to do a huge extravaganza that involves space and aliens, and it'll be The Matrix meets The Gladiator meets, I'm like, no, let's bring it down. Let's back up from the big epic thing. Let's make it smaller so I can make my money back. So yeah, it definitely does stand the test of time, because there's not a whole lot else to put up against it.
So, as we understand from that viewpoint, as far as the behind the scenes and that kind of thing, what about the film itself? What about the film really makes it stand the test of time? We talked about everything but the film, but what about the film itself? Was the film that good? Was it good enough to warrant Academy Award accolades? Was Russell Crowe's performance really that good? And was Joaquin Phoenix's performance that good? Those are the questions that I'm curious about. So what do you think about their performances, as opposed to the other things, the other aesthetic things? But the performances themselves? Were they convincing as these characters who were based on real people, actually?
Yes, they were. Yes, there really was a Commodus. Um, Russell Crowe played Maximus, who actually is a fictional character, but that fictional character was based on a real Roman general named Narcissus. So, and Narcissus actually did kill Commodus. Commodus was assassinated by Narcissus in ancient Rome. I think the acting was definitely convincing and well done. I totally think Russell Crowe deserved the Best Actor nomination in 2000 for how he portrayed Maximus. I mean, he owned that film. You could just tell. This was the whole arc of this story is you've got a man who's in command of all of these troops, and his soldiers are loyal to him. And he goes from being a general to being a slave, and back to being a general, maybe. So that's quite a roller coaster ride for a character.
Right.
And to be convincing as the general and as the slave who also still has that air of authority about him, you have to own the picture. And Russell Crowe did. I think he totally stepped up. And yeah, he was pissed off about the quality of writing from time to time, and he wanted rewrites, and he ad-libbed his own lines a lot of the time. And he and Ridley would sort of like, getting like a little posse, and Russell's like, well, I want to say this, and Ridley would sometimes say yes and sometimes say no. And so people, maybe the other actors weren't always sure what they were dealing with, but the overall effect was that to me, I believe Russell Crowe is Maximus. I totally believe that I totally believe the troops that were loyal to him when he was the general and when he was a slave, and he sort of got like the other slaves to rally with him. I totally believe that too, and Joaquin Phoenix was just sinister as Commodus, absolutely sinister. And he comes off like this kind of wimpy guy, which makes him more sinister, as it turns out. It's like you really don't want to cross this guy, not because he's so imposing. The man's he's a worm, but worms can be dangerous, really dangerous. And he was weak and cowardly, so that made him more dangerous, actually. And I love there was this one sort of line that almost became a tagline for the film, where Joaquin Phoenix was sort of parodying Maximus when he said something along the lines of "Am I not merciful?" And this is when he's terrorizing his sister by threatening her son. So he gets the sister to divulge a plot, but he does it by threatening her son. And so Commodus is walking around sort of, rambling about, how things are going to play out. And he's just desperate to get the people to love him, because the big problem is that the people love Maximus, even though he's just a slave. They just think he's awesome, and they could care less about the emperor, and the emperor's not real happy about that. So he's trying to figure out and it's like, I can't kill him, but I got to figure out a way to get the people back on my side. And so he gets the sister to tell the plot, and then he says, "Am I not merciful?" And he walks up to the sister, and he's sort of caressing her in this really horrible, icky, sinister way. And then he screams, "Am I not merciful?" It's like, oh crap. And she gets this look of fright in her eyes because Joaquin Phoenix ad-libbed that. That was not supposed to happen. She was like, what the hell? What? And so that look when he's like screamed at her, that was real. So it's just moments like that, to me, really make the movie. So yeah, I totally think it stands the test of time. I mean, I love gladiator pictures anyway. You know, this borrows some of the best elements of like Spartacus. You know, you see Spartacus all over this movie. Ben-Hur, it borrows. I mean, like the gladiator fighting, where you had like the Roman soldiers coming in on chariots, totally borrowed from Ben-Hur. You know, um, and they're just, you know, and then the use of these venerable Shakespearean actors like Derek Jacobi, for example. um yeah, I mean, it borrowed in the best way from what had gone on before it, but it did, you know, create something interesting and new, like we were ready to see another take on gladiator type movies by the time 2000 came along. What did you think, Craig?
Well, it was interesting to me is just like anything in life, there's always these things that um, you would think would just keep things in an even keel. And then there's always the petty jealousies. Um, so, for example, in this film, early on, you know already, you know that um, Marcus Aurelius, who is the Caesar at the time, is so fond of Maximus that he wishes that his son didn't exist.
Yeah. Ouch.
He would
Ouch.
prefer, and he would have preferred uh, Lucilla, his daughter, to be. He wishes she was a man, that she could take over his throne, but because he felt she had the fervor and the enough, not totally, but at least enough compassion that she would be more fair than less fair.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with Commodus was he was a child who felt that as he grew up, that his privilege he meant that he could have and do anything he wanted to do and anything he pleased. And that bothered Aurelius because he was like, I need you to be a Caesar in the sense of you need to not only rule as an emperor, but also be a good ruler of the people for the people. Early in the conversation with Maximus, he makes Maximus go back to, he makes Maximus talk to him like an equal, not the emperor, not the commander, chief of everything. You're not a general. We're just people talking, like friends, like a father and a son. And you know, early in the movie, when he says father and son, he truly meant that. He wished that Maximus was his son. He wishes his daughter was a son. He wishes that Commodus would just go somewhere in a corner. But see, the problem was, and the thing that he also understood was that unless he did something to command a change in the situation with regard to the successor, that Rome itself would be almost like it was already bad. It was just going to be worse. He admits that he wasn't a great ruler. He ruled by force and not by mind and sight. But as he got older, he realized that that was a deficit to the Roman Empire. If it wasn't for uh, conquering other places and other lands, then his essence of self was that he didn't feel was worthy. He knew that the Senate needed to take over. He felt for Rome's survival that people who were going to at least try to judge things fairly, whether they were going to be fair or not, he didn't know. That's why he wanted someone who was fair, and he felt Maximus was that. You could tell, like you said earlier, Karen, early in the film, Maximus had his soldiers, they loved it. They loved him because he didn't go up and say, okay, charge, and I'm going to go on a hill. He said, wait till my order. And he got it run with the cavalry, which is the hardest thing to do and fighting, because you don't know, as you're riding on the horse, it does trample and knock people away. But now that you're in the thick of it, you got to fight your sword both sides of that horse, or you're going to get knocked off, which he actually did.
Right.
But he was so what's the word?
Fearless.
Fearless, fiery, commanding. I mean, he was so much of everything. But the most thing he was if there was anyone pure of heart in his family, it was him. And Marcus Aurelius knew that, and that's why he wanted him to be his successor. And I know I'm giving too much of the movie away, probably. But the essence of this was, you've got this jealousy. This, as you said, Joaquin Phoenix was narcissistic, evil. I mean, he was incarnate. He was just, and yet, in his mind, he thought he was in the right.
Well, certainly he was entitled to inherit the throne.
Sure, but just like anything else, entitlement doesn't necessarily mean, from the rest of us, obviously, that it needs to happen. And sadly, in a lot of monarchies, that's what does happen, and that's usually the fall of many of those situations, because of succession, as opposed to who's the better person to be in charge. So yeah, so I get his privilege, but because he always acted upon that privilege, nobody liked him. Nobody. Not even his sister. Nobody.
Being the emperor wasn't really a popularity contest, and there was this notion of divine right. It's like, it's not so much that the best person should get the job, it's that the person who inherits should get the job. Otherwise, the sister would have been empress. And Marcus Aurelius could have changed things and made his daughter the empress of Rome. I mean, there might have been some grumbling, but he could have pulled that off. But the problem was that Rome was in a fragile state when this movie opens, because the Senate had basically been shunted aside, but the Senate held a great deal of power. And the soldiers were sort of, shunted aside. And they had a great deal of power. So, and that was Marcus Aurelius doing. He didn't defer enough to the Senate, so they weren't on his side. And they were fighting in all these wars, so the soldiers were tired. In the opening part of the movie, where things are being set up, Russell Crowe has just led his soldiers to this great battle. The man is exhausted. And he meets up with Marcus Aurelius, and Marcus Aurelius says, well, what do you want? He says, I want to go home.
I want to go home, right.
I'm tired. I would like to see my wife and child, please. And Marcus Aurelius is like, sure, you can go home. I'm like, this guy's never going home. I mean, I knew that the first time I saw the movie. It's like, this guy's not going to see anything like his home anytime soon.
And the other part of it was, Maximus knew he wasn't a politician. He wasn't political at all. He fought for the glory of Rome because of the emperor, for the emperor, nothing more. And so he looked forward to, since the battles had ended, and he's like, everything's at peace. We took care of the Germanic mob and craziness and all that. Let's just sit back and enjoy the fruits of our labor, and me go back to my family and live happily ever after.
I'm a farmer. To the victor go the spoils.
And I think at some point Marcus Aurelius told him that's what was going to happen, until he realized, as he was dying, that if he doesn't do something to shake it up now, he'd never be able to do anything the future of his beloved Rome was going to just go to the wayside, because he knew his son wasn't up to it. So Yeah, Russell Crowe wanted to just be a normal guy, the average Joe again, like he was before. And truthfully, truth be known, I think Marcus Aurelius, if had his life been able to extend, he kind of wanted that for himself too. But that was not part of his responsibility as an emperor. He wasn't going to
Well,
ever get that peace.
I just have to point out the irony of Marcus Aurelius wishing that Maximus was his son, but if Maximus had actually been his son, he would have turned out like Joaquin Phoenix. I mean, the man was a crappy father.
I don't know.
So
I still think when it comes down to it, it's still a matter of personality and who you are. He
no,
watched this.
I think the father, I mean, the father rears the child. He was a crappy father, I think,
Yeah,
but
but
you
my
can
point,
disagree.
well, no, my point is there are crappy fathers, but their sons don't always end up the same way. That's my point. There's crappy fathers, but some kids get past that and don't ever want to be like that and will grow up to be a better person. But see, the thing is, these two grew up together. Remember that. So how come he couldn't have gotten some of the traits from this guy? Because that's not that's not who Maximus was as a person either. Maximus was the person that he needed to be always. And I don't think it would have been just because of being reared by this particular. I think you still have your own personality. And I just think that this kid, Commodus, he could have gone a different way and been more of a soldier and all that. That just wasn't his nature. That wasn't him. He wanted to rule and be just a king. He was what everybody stereotypically would call a gold spoon or silver spoon kid.
But he grew up
And
in the shadow. He grew up in the shadow of great wealth, watching Marcus Aurelius wielding power.
sure,
Maximus didn't grow up like that. I mean, Maximus was a soldier. He was off on campaigns. He wasn't like sitting at the feet of Marcus Aurelius learning how to be the ruler of the people.
I get that, but we've seen other epic situations and historical situations where uh, a good example is Troy. Um, uh, what is the actor's name? Eric Bana's character in Troy. He was the son of the king, but he was also a mighty warrior.
Agamemnon.
Yeah, but I'm just saying he could have been like that too. Why not? That just wasn't his personality, but that was his personality. In Troy, he was a warrior, not just sitting back in the Senate or whatever with his father. My point is that a lot of it has to do with who you are inside too. If greed is your thing, then greed's your thing.
But
Sorry.
that's where you have parents who tell you that greed is not supposed to be your thing. I'm sure he never heard that
Sure.
message from Marcus Aurelius,
Not
because
saying that he did.
Marcus
Not
Aurelius
saying that he did.
benefited and was just as greedy. I mean, I think you reap what you sow, and Marcus Aurelius reaped what he sowed with Commodus. He was a monster of his own making, and he even said that in the movie. He said to Commodus, you know, I wasn't that good a father to you. I should have been a better father.
I
When
get
he
it.
was telling him why he couldn't be king, and why not king, but emperor, and why Maximus needed to be emperor instead. One of the reasons is that I wasn't a good enough father to you.
I get it. But I'm just saying that's not the only thing that our human being is. It's just that narrow scope is my point.
I
That's all.
think it can be a critical factor in how you develop as an adult. That's We can agree to disagree on that, which is cool. Um, I think the other thing that I loved about this movie, and again we go back to the beginning, was after this amazing battle. Remember, as you pointed out, Gregory Russell Crowe is not only, you know, telling his troops that they need to like go and get these Germanic peoples, these terrible rebels, but he's getting on a horse and he's in the trenches with them, which is one of the
Right.
reasons why his men love him so much. So they do all this fighting, and then Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, comes along surveying the field, all the bloody bodies, and it's like, okay, well, there are more of them on the ground than us. This is good. And then Joaquin Phoenix, Commodus, comes riding up after spending a very indolent, day in a carriage with his sister, who, and, just chatting about good times and family and, just having a lovely time. And then he's like, oh yeah, we are fighting a war, right? Okay, we'll get my horse. So somebody gets his horse, and he magically astrides his horse, and he runs to the field of battle saying, have I missed the battle? And Marcus Aurelius is like, you missed the war. And, but Maximus, saved the day. And the Commodus shoots, Maximus a look like, whoa, well, okay, all right, well, back to our regularly scheduled programming, but I got my eye on you now.
Sure, and he even tries to persuade Maximus to be on his side. And Maximus was still saying, well, on your side where? Because I'm going home.
Right.
I can be on your side from afar in Spain.
Right. And I'm certainly not your rival because I'm going home.
Yeah, I mean, you got it all. It's all you, boy, brother.
Yeah, it's all on you. But, have at it. Have fun.
I'm not even trying to be a part of this at all.
Right.
So as soon as my commission is up in the army, I'm going home. And I'd be singing if I could sing. I'm going home.
Right.
I got a
exactly.
kid. I've got a wife and child. I got my house is on a hill, and this is all good. We look down and we can see stuff. Sun.
There's land, lots of land.
I'm a prince in my own family. Don't got to be one over here.
Right, exactly.
That's not good enough, is it? It's
no. Because if that was, we wouldn't have a movie.
Tyrants are always poking in their little noses and everything.
One of the criticisms of the movie, a couple of criticisms. One is that the characters, there weren't enough layers in the characters. For one, like Maximus, the Maximus character was all good. I mean, there really wasn't all that much bad about him. I mean, he killed in self-defense, but he was compassionate, he was strong, blah, blah. And there weren't too many sort of like, weaknesses. And people are more dimensioned, that they have more dimensions to them than that. So that was one criticism. And that criticism also was levied about the Joaquin Phoenix character, Commodus. He was just all evil all the time. I mean, he brought an ill wind with him if he just said hello. You had to look around. It's like, what do you mean hello, or do you mean you're about to die? What kind of mood are you in today?
Right, because that's the difference between being an emperor and being a tyrant. He was a tyrant, and
he was a tyrant.
It was never going to ever be anything different, because that's how he wanted to be. It wasn't just about being in control. It was about being in charge and making you know that he was in charge. That's what and sinister at the same time. It just was a bad mix.
But one of the criticisms in terms of the craft of the movie was that character could have been more layered. Both of them could have been more layered. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's some merit to that. But then at the same time, it's sort of like, I don't know how much time you want to lay out for subtleties when you've got all this other stuff going on between, these humongous battles and, the palace intrigue and, whose side are the soldiers on and, getting the gladiators back and forth,
And I think they wanted it to be a very clear path between good and evil.
Right.
And so what better way to do that with a guy who fights for his emperor, but is a person who's a homebody who wants to be with family. And then you have a guy who wants everyone to like him, but nobody does because of who he is and why he is. And there's just nothing very likable about the guy other than the fact that this is going to sound really bad, that he gets it in the end. that's the most likable part about it. And even then,
that was treacherous
even
too.
that was, I know, he stabs, oh, I'm telling the story. But yeah, he does something.
I mean, after
heinous.
20 years, if you haven't seen it by now, that's on you. So let's just talk about the movie.
Okay, so he stabs him in the fair fight. He stabs him. He stabs him to get an advantage. Because let's be honest, as much as he would practice with his men and all that stuff, they're not going to cut the emperor's kid. They're just not going to do that.
Right. So he never really got trained that well.
Yeah, and this is him trying to make it his training to make him seem like he's a tough guy. Yeah, he's got a little skill. I mean, he's got a little skill. But he couldn't rely on that because he's going against this guy who's a seasoned veteran warrior, not just in the battles, but now as a gladiator too.
Right, hand-to-hand combat.
The true one-on-one all the time, because there's nothing else. You know, can't be on a horse giving orders, slashing, none of that. I mean, don't get me wrong. He was all that. He would have been a gladiator anyway. He was a gladiator anyway.
Right.
The problem is that the other guy wasn't. So he took whatever advantage he could take in order to find a way to win this situation. But see, even in that, because he wanted people to like him, because he wanted the people to be all for him, and even in the fight, he's trying to look for accolades for people, and they're all looking at him like, no.
Right.
And then he's like, well, do this, do that, soldiers. And they're like, no. And then when Maximus knocked his sword away, he goes, a sword. And they go, it's right over there on the ground. The sword's over there on the ground. Give me your sword. And as the soldiers are about to give a sword, the commander says, no.
Sheathe your weapons, is what he said.
There you go. Sheathe your weapons. And they went, okay. Because to be honest, they really didn't want to give it to him anyway.
Right.
They were just saying, well, he is the commander. And when they did it, they were doing it slow. Like, it wasn't like, by the time they got it out, he got stabbed. It didn't even really good.
Right. I kind of really don't want to, give you my weapon, but, we'll just see.
I'm not trying to give you anything. Because when he first asked for it, they didn't even move. Right,
they did not.
And then all of a sudden, one or two were like, well, because they're trying to figure, which side am I going to get? Well, and then the true friend, ultimately, of Maximus is like, the words you just said, sheathe your swords. So they're like, cool.
Well, he really wasn't a friend because he helped betray him to begin with.
Not friend, but I'm just saying, ultimately, he's like, no, he came to his senses and this is the right thing to do. Right.
So, and this movie totally borrows from Ben-Hur in the arc of the story. You got Ben-Hur, who's a prince in a prince of Israel, but Israel's been conquered by the Romans. So, so it's like, well, come on, be on the side of the Romans because Rome is where it's at. And so he, lives in a family of great wealth, but he has all this compassion, but he definitely enjoys the privileges of his birth. And then everything's taken away from him, everything. And he ends up being a slave and a gladiator, except he's a chariot gladiator instead of, hand-to-hand combat type gladiator. And you've got hand-to-hand combat in Gladiator and chariot combat in Ben-Hur, but again, relatively similar stories and compelling stories too, because I just think American audiences have always shown an interest in sort of, riches to rags to riches type stories.
Sure.
And that's what Ben-Hur was. And if it's not riches to riches, it's riches to rags to at least redemption, something like that. And for Gladiator, you've got a similar sort of thing, not riches so much, but stature to, having all of that taken away and your family ripped from you. And then, you're on a quest for revenge. So is Ben-Hur. What does revenge do to you? What does that quest for revenge mean? And are you redeemed? Can you get redemption while you're seeking revenge? I think both of those films deal with that question. And to me, though, that's a universal theme, because we all, I think I'll just speak for the entire world here. We all want to be redeemed. We're all looking for redemption. We're all looking for justification, or we're looking for that. We're looking for somebody to say you've done enough, or you did well, or you did the right thing. People are always afraid that they're doing the wrong thing, so they love hearing that they actually did the right thing.
And that's not that different from Commodus. Those are the things, he wanted those things too.
Right.
He just didn't know how to go about them. And that's his downfall. He didn't know how to go about them. Had he been even an inkling like his father, in least what we saw of his father toward the end, before he killed him.
Right.
He was killing what he couldn't be. He was trying to destroy what he couldn't be. And that was even the whole point of even going after Maximus, the things he couldn't be. Because if you eliminate those, then no one will look at those things, and they will only look at you.
Right. They'll only go to you because you're all they have left.
Right. And he never could get that away. And he thought, even with taking everything away from Maximus, destroying his life, destroying things around him, how is it this slave, this gladiator, who's in his eyes nothing, how are the people still looking at him as if he was the general, as if he was still in command? Those things haunted Commodus.
Right.
His entire his adult life, actually, since he was a kid. Because even as a kid, they said they played together, or like brothers. But through that whole time, Marcus Aurelius still liked and favored Maximus.
Right.
So how do you fight against it? How do you compete against that when your father is over here and you're over here? So I get that's the only compelling thing, if there is anything, about Commodus, is fighting for a father's love that he'd never had.
And he shouldn't have had to fight for his father's love, because that was his father.
That's very true.
The only thing he was entitled to actually was his father's love. He wasn't entitled to anything else that he acted like he was entitled to in the whole movie. But he actually was entitled to his father's love. His father owed him that love. And that's why his father wasn't a good father, because his father didn't give it.
I get it. I get that. But it still makes me wonder what he was like that his father didn't want to be around him either. I'm wondering what else was going on in this child that his father didn't see those positive things that he would have possibly nurtured. So I think, again, what was the kid like? Because what we saw of him, we didn't like him from the beginning. Even inside the carriage with his sister, it was just like,
yeah, it was sinister.
It was icky. Yeah.
Yeah, very icky.
And it wasn't even the time for the sinister essence to be even apparent yet.
Right. But the fact that he
like
just seems so intimate with his sister, and it's like, I think he's got the hots for his sister. I mean, that was apparent.
I thought he did.
He did have the hots for his sister. They had an affair.
But my point is, when you see the movie, you don't know that's his sister at first. You think that's his
Right,
wife.
right, right.
You
But
think,
it's not.
or someone who's going to be his wife, and she didn't play like, no, leave me alone. There was none of that.
Right.
So, and then, but what got me, it upset me right away, without even knowing, other than the fact that I knew for sure that was the Emperor's kid. When they stop, they finally arrive, he and his sister in the caravan inside their compartment. He opens the compartment up. It's almost like, where's my horse? Where's my horse? I'm like,
Right.
where's your horse? I'm like, this little punk. And a sad thing, I never swayed from this little punk for the rest of the movie.
Well, he did come off like a punk.
Oh my
So,
goodness, it was horrible. This dude was. I was like, man. I was like, if I don't think I'd have liked you either.
well,
You
it's
know.
funny because during the filming, and again, like I said, this was I mean, it was a long shoot, weeks and weeks and weeks. Tough shoot, with, with character, with actors dying and with, um, script issues and all of that. And then you had the situation where, and I just forgot what I was going to say. Um, you had this long shoot, and I can't remember what I was going to say. I was about to say something related to, oh yes, I just remembered, squirrel. Okay, so so during this long shoot, it was, I mean, people are people, and Joaquin Phoenix was, I guess eating normally because, you're out in the middle of nowhere and boys got to eat. Well, during the weeks of filming, he started gaining weight,
Right.
and somebody said to Ridley Scott, Joaquin is picking up some lbs. Is this going to be a problem, like from a continuity standpoint or whatever? I mean, can you talk? Somebody needs to talk to him. So Ridley Scott, says something to Joaquin about, gee, you're looking a little, hefty,
Chucky there.
a little chunky there. And Joaquin was like, well, I'm playing a toady. Shouldn't I look like a toady? And, it was like, well, yeah, I guess so, and that was all that was said about it. But Joaquin Phoenix stopped eating after that. So it's like, okay, well, that went well. I don't know. It's sort of, I kind of like that story simply because it's just nice to know that someone other than the starlet, someone other than Judy Garland, was having that conversation with the director. And it's just nice to see that for once it was a guy.
I guess it didn't really matter because either way, he was going to be the crazy dude to get stabbed at the end anyway.
He
Uh,
was.
I just the cool thing about it was he was not supposed to be likable, and boy, he sure wasn't.
He sure wasn't. The other thing that people complained about in like user reviews was that they kept, there were a couple of things. For one, the woman, I want to say Connie Nielsen, who played the sister, was in real life like a Roman history buff.
Wow.
So much so that the director and others actually consulted with her to make sure that the film, maintained as many aspects of realism as the director felt comfortable retaining. But they didn't retain everything. Like, for example, they kept referring to the Colosseum in Rome as the Colosseum. Well, in Roman times, it was not the Colosseum. That's not what they called it. It was called the Flavia Amphitheater. That's how it was referred to. And it's not like they didn't know that's what it was called. They just decided, well, yeah, technically, yes, that is the correct name, but we don't want to confuse the audience, so we're just going to call it the Colosseum. The other thing was that the the amphitheater that they showed in the movie looked huge, but a lot of that was computer generated. There were only 2 levels where there were actual actors, and cardboard cutouts and extras. And beyond that, it was computer generated. But the Colosseum in Rome, what we're now calling the Colosseum, is much smaller than that amphitheater that you saw in the movie. The other thing was this whole, like when we started our show, I had like my symbol here. The famous up, down, merciful, he lives, he dies. Well, actually, that's not how it worked. In ancient Rome, when the emperor was ready to give the signal as to what was to happen, up actually meant kill him. Go for, cut him off. And if the emperor did that, that actually meant he lives, because this symbol meant sheathe your weapons. Put your weapon in your holder. This meant take your weapon out of your holder and kill him. But even though they knew that, they said, we don't want to confuse people because we would have to explain that. So let's just go with the traditional, with the modern day version of what people think is going on.
Right, because in the modern day, we think this is positive.
Right, exactly.
And that's negative.
Yes. But I just thought that kind of, we're waiting. Right, we're waiting.
That was the same.
We're in abeyance. What are you going to do? But, things like that. I mean, I guess why to me this is fascinating is that maybe what differentiates this movie from some other sort of big budget movies where dramatic license is taken is that at least the production team made it a point to learn the history before and they consciously deviated for what are could be argued as valid reasons from a story standpoint or from an audience. I mean, you're making this movie for an audience, you're not making it for like just you and your Roman history buddies. So what's going to move the story along, even if we're not completely loyal to historical accuracy. And I can get behind an approach like that rather than, well, I know this is what happened, but I'm just going to write it like this. Mm-hmm. They cared a lot more about the actual history, even though they didn't always adhere to that history. So for that, I kind of give a tip of the hat.
Yeah, I think people are a lot more sophisticated than we give them credit. However, with that being said, there are a lot of people that know a lot of things, but not everything. And so you want to present things to where anybody, whether you be common, whether you be more advanced, whatever the case may be, are going to still enjoy the film. And if you go to the realms of it being too complicated, you'll lose people, and the film itself will not garner what the professionals want, which is profit. But at the same time, for those who are very theatrically inclined, people to be entertained and have fun. So some certain things I think would be remiss, but maybe they erred on the right side, because it was an interesting and enjoyable film without being too cerebral.
Right. And I do think they erred on the right side of history, because at the end of the day, Flavia Amphitheater or Colosseum, it's the place where they had the big fights.
I get that.
So it doesn't really, I mean, at the end of the day, it's technically more accurate to call it the Flavia Amphitheater, but it doesn't really matter in terms of the story or the plot or the quality of the story. People know as the Colosseum, just call it the Colosseum. It's like, the difference between calling, White Sox Stadium Comiskey Park or calling it, White Sox Park. people know it as White Sox Park, so they're going to White Sox Park, even though that's technically not the name. And the same thing with like, the symbols. I mean, you would just have to explain that, and I don't think you get that much value out of explaining all that, even though you would be historically accurate. So yeah, I think they did sort of, that's why I like their approach. It's like learn what you're dealing with and then make conscious decisions about whether that's going to work or not, but at least, understand the times and the history that you're dealing with so that you can make, defensible decisions about what is going to fit into your narrative and what isn't. I have no problem with that. But most directors aren't that careful. Ridley Scott is one of the ones who is, I think.
Yeah. And going back to the essence of the film, it was nice to have another epic. BenHur was an epic. The Ten Commandments was an epic. Spartacus was an epic. This was a nice modern epic, giving back a little bit of the credence to those that preceded it. And, we almost forgot how big scale theatrics really worked and how well it did. But at the end, we also know that typically those types of things tend to be very costly when it comes to filmmaking. So taking on that type of mantra was a cool thing in this case. I thought they did a pretty good job. I enjoyed the film and whatever realism it showed, and also the combat between the true protagonist and the true antagonist in the film between Russell and Joaquin throughout the film. So we got a lot of different things that really made this film worth watching again.
I think it was a real miss that the Academy did not at least nominate Ridley Scott for Best Director. He should have been nominated at a minimum.
Yeah, and maybe as you alluded to, maybe the behind the scenes infighting might have caused a lot of those things not to have occurred. Because just like anything else, if the people outside of the situation are paying attention to some of those things, so too are a lot of the people who are involved in those things and involved in the quote unquote scoring of who should get this as opposed to that. Maybe in this situation, the score was the score and everybody did everything that they said and it was wonderful and good direction, yada, yada. And over here, we had a lot of problems. Well, how can we nominate that if they have some problems?
And even the musical score generated a lot of controversy because there were two people, a woman and Hans Zimmer gets like all the accolades for the film score, but it wasn't just Hans Zimmer. It was also, oh my goodness, who else was it? Oh, okay. It was also, the writers, and did Hans, I could have sworn of course I could have sworn I had this queued up, and of course I can't find it again. Okay, original music by Lisa Gerrard, that's who I'm thinking of. She sang on the score. She sang and she helped write the music. But Hans Zimmer was the one who got, I believe he won the Academy Award. It won Best Sound Effects. Best Actor, Best Costume. Okay, he must have been nominated, but he didn't. I guess he didn't win. And I'm sorry, I'm also Ridley Scott was nominated, but he did not win for Best Director. Joaquin Phoenix was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role, and he didn't win. It was also nominated for the movie was also nominated for Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, and Best Music and Original Score was Hans Zimmer. He was nominated, but Lisa Gerrard should have been nominated along with him, but she was not. However, I believe that she was with the Golden Globes. Yeah, and she was. And they actually won, both of them won the Golden Globe for Best Original Score.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I'm sorry. So Ridley Scott was nominated but did not win. And for a movie of that stature to win Best Picture and give the Best Actor award, it was pretty surprising that the picture also didn't win for Best Director or garner any of the writing Oscars.
Yeah, the Oscars is a very interesting animal in itself, as to who gets what and why. And there's always a backstory. But at the same time, we as moviegoers and those of us who are movie enthusiasts, we still want to see the movies. We still want to see what we think is good and talk about that by the coffee pots in the hallways and wherever we talk about really good films. So, but I think answering the question, did Gladiator stand the test of time? I think it did. I think if I had just watched it for the first time, I'd be just as excited about it as I was back in 2000 when I saw it originally. And I thought Russell Crowe did an excellent job. I think that helped his acting career too over time. He's a fine actor, I think. Just like anything else, there's a lot of films out there that you're not always going to pick the best movie, but you can always tell who is a superior actor by how they relate to the story and how convincing their characters are. And in this movie, he's very convincing.
He totally is. And so is Joaquin Phoenix. They both did a fabulous job. And so was Connie Nielsen. I mean, she was really good as the sister, I think.
As a sister, yeah. I think so too. Even to the end, even with saying, pick him up, he's a gladiator, kind of died. So, yeah, all that. But that's a testament to a really good epic, getting really good character actors out there to portray the characters and bring them to life and make whatever truisms, whether they be true or not, make you feel like they are. Make you feel like that's how the people were and how they acted. Because there was no one in this film that didn't get trotted upon in some form or fashion of the main characters. Even the senator being thrown out. I mean, everybody had some issue. And in real life, people have issues. So it was never just totally glorious. Nothing was totally glorious, and that's another thing. It wasn't even totally glorious for anybody in the film. Right. Least of all, Commodus, Joaquin Phoenix character. So,
for someone who's so powerful, he spent his whole life being scared.
And when you're that scared, all the other evils come out too, don't they?
Yeah, that's what made him so dangerous.
But that's just it. You're so scared that now you have to do what you can to scheme to make sure that you come out on top. And that was horrible. Yeah, about that character. Yeah. And very sad to have to even think in or live that way or be that way. that's what caused all the chaos.
Right. All the riches in the world, he's the most powerful person, but none of it mattered because he was a scared little rabbit.
Right. Rich but not wealthy.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any comments, concerns, additional things, questions that you have for us, come and join us here at Real Point of View on our YouTube channel. If you want to see some of our archives or listen to some of our archives, you can on our channel, as well as Blog Talk Radio and also Google Podcast. So thanks again for watching. We'll come back again with some more interesting conversation about film. Not just films themselves, but sometimes, as Karen started the show off, behind the scenes. And next week, we'll probably look at Hollywood in general. What's going on out there? What's new? What's exciting? What's the state of film in America these days? So thanks again for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your night. And make sure you get out there and watch as many films as you can, because it's an education.
Or stay in there and watch as many movies as you like, but stream them, buy them, rent them, whatever.
Stream on.
Or go to a drive-in, maybe. That might be kind of fun.
It might be kind of fun. But however you're watching films, be safe, be careful out there. And there's a myriad of good films out there that are coming out, but also remember, there's a myriad of wonderful films that, like this film, 2000, that wasn't that long ago, but again, some of these films back then and before can stand the test of time. You'd be surprised. We have been. So thanks again for watching us here on A Real Point of View. Have a blessed night. See you, everybody. Peace.
Good night.
Night.